I am Curt Collier. I'm the interim leader at the Society for Ethical Culture, and I wanted to take a moment to say thank you for coming in, those who came in, and thank you for all of you who are coming in by Zoom. We certainly do appreciate it. I'd like to talk today. We're continuing our series about the ethics of ethical culture, and I just want to start with a little introductory poem called No Longer a Teenager, which I think captures a little bit of something about what I want to say. And it goes like this. My daughter, who turns 20 tomorrow and became truly independent, she doesn't need her father to help her with the bureaucracies of schools or HMOs, insurance, the DMV. She is quite capable of handling landlords, bosses, and auto repair shops, and boyfriends and roommates, and her mother. Frankly, it's a big relief. The teenage years were often stressful. Sometimes, though, I feel a little useless. But when she drove down from Northern California to visit us a couple of days, she came to the door with the biggest, warmest hug in the world for me. And when we all went out for lunch, she said, affecting a little girl's voice, "I'm going to sit next to Daddy." And she did, and slid over close to me so I could put my arm around her shoulder until the food arrived. I've been keeping busy since she's gone, mainly with teaching and writing, a little travel, with both. But I realize now how long it had been since I felt deep emotion. When she left, I said simply, "I love you." And she replied quietly, "I love you too." It isn't always easy for a 20-year-old to say that. It isn't always easy for a father. Literature and opera are full of characters who die for love. I stay alive for her.
Thank you, Curt. I'm Jim Norman. I am president of the Ethical Culture Society of Bergen County. I'd like to read a selection from Felix Adler, our founder, on commitment. We cannot adopt the way of living that was satisfactory 100 years ago. The world in which we live has changed, and we must change with it. And parenthetically, I'd like to say he wrote this about 100 years ago, but we still have to keep changing. We have to change with it. In a similar way, we should teach our children nothing which they shall ever need to unlearn. The truth which has made us free will in the end make us glad also. Every outcry against the oppression of some people by other people, or against what is morally hideous, is the affirmation of the principle that a human being is not to be violated. A human being is not to be handled as a tool, but is to be respected. May the humanity that is within every human being be held precious. The vice that underlies all vices is that we are held cheap by others, and far worse, that in our innermost soul, we think cheaply of ourselves. Now, you may feel you know Curt after having heard him speak a little bit today, but I'm going to give a formal introduction to those who don't really know him. Curt Collier has been the interim leader since February. He has served 3 ethical societies, St. Louis, Riverdale Yonkers, and the New York Society for more than 20 years. He is also a former instructor at the Humanist Institute and is a frequent guest speaker on bioethics. When not at the Society, Curt is the National Youth Programs Director for Groundwork USA, an environmental organization created by the National Park Service and the Environmental Protection Administration. He oversees programs for up to 250 youths each summer in 9 national parks and works to provide additional youth programming to 20 cities. He's also a frequent guest speaker on ways to engage diverse audiences within our national parks. Curt is a single father and lives with his son Andy in Norfolk, Virginia, when not in New Jersey.
You know, if we were back in Sherman Avenue, 61 Sherman Avenue in Newark, New Jersey, about 149 years ago, we would perhaps been invited to Thomas Moran's house. Thomas Moran was at one time one of the most famous painters in America. He had been trained in the Hudson River School and had been influenced by Turner's work in England and things like this. And he was one of the multiple people who was sent with the Ferdinand Hayden expedition in 1871 to document the wonders of Yellowstone National Park. And when he went there, of course, he was with all these great geologists and scientists and people who were great at surveying. There was a famous photographer there by the name of William Jackson, who Jackson, Wyoming is named after, and himself. And he and the photographer would often go off by themselves, and they would make wonderful little sketches and drawings and wonderful things that included in this 550-page volume on the survey of the park and other areas outside of there. The park was so fantastic and so wonderful, and the drawings were so convincing that Ulysses S. Grant did something amazing. He created the first national park in the world where we actually set aside millions of acres of land, as Grant says, for the benefit and the enjoyment of the people. Actually, we hear from the historians that what had happened, though, is that what convinced a lot of people was not so much the great scientific evidence that was in the document for Ferdinand Hayden, nor was it from the wonderful pictures and photographs that Jackson had taken, but the paintings and the drawings that Moran had shown. Because there was something about these paintings and drawings that actually moved people. And in fact, when he came back, he rented a huge studio down in Newark at 61 Sherman Avenue, took a gigantic canvas and began to put together his painting. And he wrote a letter from 61 Sherman Avenue in Newark, New Jersey to Hayden. It says, I want you to come see my painting before I put it out there. I'm going to be showing this thing, but I want to make sure that I've captured it well. Now, Moran was a great painter and etcher, and he really wanted to make sure he had meticulous details. But he said he did something very unique. And if you've been to the Grand Canyon of Yellowstone, and I'm happy to say that for the last 8-9 years, I've been there every single summer and stood almost in this spot. This is not a true painting because the needles and some of the other things that are in this photograph have been kind of smooshed together so you get the entire feel. Because what he said to Hayden is, I want people to be able to grasp the truth of the experience and to do this. And he really believed, he was something of a spiritualist himself, that he wanted to capture the essence of what that is. And perhaps that is what led to the creation of the park more than anything else. People were amazed at the wonders and the documents of Old Faithful and the photographs, but something deep inside of us moves sometimes in ways that we cannot quite wrap our head around. And I want to try that experiment for just a second. I want to tell you about something kind of annoying that happened to me, not at this Dunkin' Donuts, but I'm going to use this picture so you get the feel of this. Let me set the scene for you. I'm going to the Ethical Society of Riverdale Yonkers, and I decided I would buy some donuts and a coffee for myself, and got there early enough so that I could stand in line. Unfortunately, there were a lot of people that morning who got in line also, and we're all standing in line, and I'm way in the back. And about halfway is this adorable little child who kept going, I want a donut, I want a donut, I want a donut, and just kept going on and on and on. Now the whole line is just being polite, it's a little child. And the child says, I want a donut, give me a donut, I want a donut, give me a donut, I want a donut, give me a donut. We're all standing in line. This line is slowly moving forward and slowly moving forward while this child says, I want a donut, give me a daddy, give me the donut, I want a donut, give me a donut. It kept going on and on and on. I could see within the audience there, so in the audience here with me being annoying as well, that somehow this didn't quite seem right. I must say that the line was long and it kept going on. I want a donut, I want a donut, I want a donut, until finally people started turning around and looking at the child, and people were standing there. And eventually what happens when this went on and on, someone from behind the Dunkin' Donut counter grabbed a donut, brought it over, and handed it to the child. Now, how do you feel about that? Was that the right thing to do?
Should have done it sooner.
Should have done it sooner, right?
Done it immediately, absolutely.
Yeah, and the father who was standing there by the way, oh, it's okay, we're online, we're online. Any other thoughts? What else should have happened?
The father should have said, wait for your turn. That's the way society works.
The father should have said, wait your turn. That's what society is about, that we have to learn discipline and we just can't all have instant gratification. What else do you think?
Donuts are the worst possible food. Invented by man.
Donuts are the worst possible food donated by man, and we shouldn't even have given the child it. I should not have been there.
Anyone else.
That's right, and we're all just giving the child more sugar. You know how that's going to be. By the way, as soon as the child got the donut, she smiled, took the donut, and walked over and sat down quietly.
Well, it's like listening to a baby cry on an airplane. You just have to appreciate the baby and say, that's a happy sound, and just say, that's a happy sound.
I should just sit there and be happy the child, give me a donut, give me a donut, give me a donut, where's my donut, I want my donut. We should be happy that a child can do that. Anyone else? Yes, Diane, did you have something?
I was thinking, I'm glad the father accepted the donut instead of making an issue about, how dare you interfere with my parental rights?
Yes, and
Do my parenting myself in this.
yeah, maybe the father didn't want to give the child a donut, and maybe the child had other kind of issues, and the child didn't want to do that, and some people stepped in and did this, but he was patient about it, and all these things were happening. Now you point to the main problem we have with ethics. Because if you look just at the scene, a child wanting a donut, people hand the donut, we bring to it, all of us, what we just think is important and what should be done. We don't see what is the good or the thing we should do right in the incident. This was actually pointed out by a philosopher in the 1600s by the name of David Hume, a Scottish guy, wearing a turban because it was fashionable today in those days to show that you were like the ancient Greeks in mathematics. You were smart about those things. And he says this is an important issue, and the problem we have, and he was looking at all the ways that people make rationalizations about what it is we should do. And he says, you know, reason can only take us so far. That's the problem. The problem is that when you see something and you see a reaction or the consequences of that, what you don't see is what we should do about that. You see what is, and you see what is maybe happening, but you don't see what is the ought that it should be there. And that was his kind of famous thing. For example, we can say that, well, a car going a certain speed is less likely to kill someone at the impact than if they're going to go at 40 miles an hour. And therefore, we have made a decision in our cities to slow down the speed, to stop killing people who are trying to cross streets and like that. We call this a consequentialist form of ethics, where we look at the consequences. The challenge, Hume says, is that nowhere in there, you see a car speed and you see people getting killed, nowhere in there is that being killed by a car is a wrong thing. We have to bring that somehow to the equation. We don't see it there. We feel it. We know that something should be done. But in that accident, we don't see what is the thing that we should do. We just make a decision that killing people with cars is not a good thing, and therefore let us set the laws up. But you don't see it right in the consequences of the action itself. And this was, for David Hume, kind of his formulation of ethics, that reason can only take us so far. That instead what we have to then say is that we have to have the feelings of ethics that reside deep inside of us. That we have to have what he called moral sentiments or passion. That we should have these things and we should feel those inside of there, and we're still going to make mistakes, just like how hard it is to come and reason our way to the right answer, right? Well, reason's going to take us in many different directions. But ultimately, seeing someone get hit by a car or all these things inside of us brings up some deep feelings. And he says that's the thing that society should foster. We should foster ethical reasoning. He said it could take us a certain distance. But the thing is society more often than not does not elicit the best from us. It elicits somehow the worst. We create the conditions that bring out our worst rather than our best. And he said that's the kind of ethics we had. Most people just ignored him and went on, and of course, in the other different kinds of direction. And for good reasons, because sometimes it's very, very difficult to think that to what extent can we trust our passions and our emotions to guide us in our ethical thinking. You know, if I think of, in fact, Blaise Pascal, when he was reflecting on this, he said, La cour a ses raisons ne connaît pas, right? The heart has its reasons, which reason knows nothing of. Right? We do things, but we're not sure what they are, and it's very, very difficult. And how can you build a society when we're just caught up in the passions? In fact, our normal reaction is to say, let's take a step back on that and let's all be reasonable. And David Hume says that's not as easy as you think either. If we think about what happened on January 6th, for example, we could talk about these very, very passionate individuals, one way or the other, thinking of doing what they're thinking is right. Now, there's some interesting things. If you're trying to cultivate a sense of passion or emotion in somebody, according to a lot of people, you need to think about our own biologies. And that's a lot of times what drives us, our sense of feeling endangered, our sense of feeling scared, which I think this is not a sign of strength. This is a sign of fear, for example. But we also need to think about the ways that, for example, testosterone influences that. We know, for example, that we've known for a long time that testosterone, believe it or not, makes people more aggressive. This was the thinking of people had for a long time. People have also said, though, that testosterone actually makes you less able to notice the feelings of another person. So they did this with some subjects, and they actually did some things where they'd ask them to read the emotions, gave them testosterone, gave it a time to kick in, had them look at that, and it actually decreases. Believe it or not, some women may find this hard to believe, but sometimes testosterone makes males mostly less able to read the emotions of another person than not before. Now, that sounds pretty easy, and we could just say we should ban testosterone. I'm kind of for that sometimes. However, it brings us back to the kind of writings of Robert Sapolsky. He wrote this book called Behave, which I find very important. He looks a lot like Jesus or God there. He's a neuroscientist and a brilliant guy, and he's studied all the things that go inside of our bodies that influence our decision makings. And he's the guy who came out with the decision, it's context, context, context. That somehow that influences. And he said, for example, testosterone makes us more willing to do what it takes to maintain status. That's what it does. And when his original study of primates and then looking at other people of other, it's really about status. And the key point is, what does it take to maintain status? Engineer social circumstances right, and boosting testosterone levels during a challenge could make people like crazy do the most acts of random kindness. It's just about what is the main kind of status that they want. He said the problem isn't that testosterone can increase levels of aggression. The problem is the frequency for which we reward aggression and give status to that. Now, I can't think of any instances in our American society where we award aggression and think of that as a status symbol. None come to my head. But it does import his whole idea that these deep passions within us actually, we are not predestined to think one way or the other, but we actually can engineer context. We can shape our environment that actually can elicit out different things from us, different responses. And then that's what we have to get intelligent on. That's the whole point of his book, is that we need to understand that there are deep drives within this for security, like in those some people say, and all these other things, but that ultimately we have to engineer and create a society where we can bring out and use these things to our betterment. I find that idea pretty convincing for myself, because I can't think of, and by the way, so did Felix Adler, because Felix Adler thought the same thing, that the purpose was for us was to be a society for an ethical culture, that in a way, I always use the term like gardeners, that we're to go out into the greater society and work with it in such a way through our relationships that elicits the life-affirming qualities of other people. He thought rather than telling people what to do, we should try and set up the society that elicits our better selves. And much akin to what Hume is saying about how we can influence the decisions. Ethical culture doesn't have, I wish I had some book, which I do right here, that I could hand you and say what it is you should believe and how you should think. Instead, that truth continues to emerge from this space that we create when we come and listen deeply to each other and we experience one another. And then our society should be the same thing. Ethical culture did not work to tell people what to do with their lives, but build hospitals. They built schools. They worked to create the American Civil Liberties Union. They worked to create the NAACP. They built some of the first free kindergartens in the United States, all to give the people the tools and to work on the abolition of child labor and all the other circumstances that they thought would impact the way that we make decisions. And that is our continued work to this day. And for many of us, that's really important. Now, I know that some people in this room may not be convinced, and you may be still thinking that reason has to play a role. I think so as well. I should not just say it's totally about that. But we should also remember the kind of the importance of fostering emotions and responding to them, because I cannot think of any situation ever that would be reasonable to tear gas children at the border right there. If, you know, when I point out things like this, my friends just say to you, you're nothing but a bleeding heart liberal. And I think they say that derisively. And I say that, yes, indeed, my heart bleeds for this. Are there any other bleeding heart liberals in this room as well who don't feel happy about these things as well? And I think that is the thing that we don't want to lose sight of. I don't want to get lost in debates. I don't want it to be all about these things. There are solutions. We do need to find them. But ultimately, we have to create an environment where you're not tear gassing some child who is sitting there at that area. I just came back from Texas, and that's a picture of my mom. About to lose her any minute. And I went to say my goodbyes. And, excuse me, it's supposed to feel like that. And my mother was raised in San Diego. She was from an extremely poor family. Her parents had no money because the father was an alcoholic. She used to go to the beach and just dig for clams to help feed her family when she was 11 or 12. Very, very, very poor person. Met my father in the military, who I still want to call for statutory rape. That's a joke. She was just a child. And then she didn't ever finish high school, married him, had her first child at 17 years of age, her last child. Me at 24 years of age, had very little education, eventually became a hairdresser, built her own business. I have to tell you that when in Hondo, Texas, we were in a very, very small town in Texas, and you went in there and there were all these women, and it was completely out of control. My mother had margarita machines going, and all these people in this very conservative part of Texas were going wild, and she'd dye their hair purple, and then she'd put it back together again before she left, before they left. And she had all this fun, and she built another business, and she traveled to 27 countries around the world. And more importantly, my mother influenced me in deep ways to think about the world and to care about others, because that's what she did. Even towards the last of her life, as people would pass away, the funeral home would call my mother, and she would go there and do the hair of the women who were laying there at the mortuary, because she said she knew how they liked their hair, and she wanted to do those things. And I think that's the most important takeaway we talk about ethical culture, is that we have to work on creating the environments that elicit the best from ourselves, and to enter into relationships with other people that bring out that feelings as well. Those feelings as well. We do use the power of our minds. We are people who think, but also we are people who feel passionately and deeply. And in some situations when we don't know what the right thing to do, the affirmation of the worth and dignity of the other person is the place where we start. And that's the thing that we always need to remember. Thank you so much.
Curt, thank you so much for those wonderful words. At this point, I would like to ask people in the room and on Zoom to share what we gleaned from the platform and ideas we hope to explore, inspired by Curt's words. So rather than do it the way we've done it so often in the past, which is to ask questions and make comments, please share what Curt's words mean to you, to your lives, and what's relevant to you.
I'm just thinking about Dunkin' Donuts. What you spoke about was so much bigger than I can talk about it all. But I liked your Dunkin' Donuts anecdote, because the context is maybe not everything, but almost everything. Why Dunkin' Donuts? What are the people doing on the line there? What is a child doing online? Why should a child wait? What model is that for that child? Okay, then I thought, it's going to be a different solution for each person. The Dunkin' Donuts representative did not want people to be annoyed or leave because they couldn't tolerate this temper tantrum going on. So what he did was maybe acceptable to others, but also good for business, to quiet that child. Another solution that just wasn't mentioned, and there really is no end to it, how about we take the child out of that situation and say, you know, sometimes you have to wait. You're not ready for this. Another time you will be. There's really no end to the solutions, and I like that. I wouldn't want to decide either.
Thank you, Ginger. Anyone else with any reflections inspired by Curt's talk?
Thank you, Curt, for sharing your heart with us. And I think that's a really important thing for all of us to share. And that's all I want to say.
Pam, please unmute.
Hi, thank you very much for allowing me to jump in here and talk a few minutes. You know, I was brought up in a household where doing good and doing right was important. Can you hear me? And I was very disappointed when I got out into the world and saw all the hardship and the meanness of people in the world. When I was a little girl, children in my class used to tease me because I was short, because I had to wear saddle shoes, because I was not what everybody expected me to be. And because of that, I think I have lived my whole life trying to do good, trying to do right. And now that I'm with ethical culture, I see that I can do right and that there is a lot of good things that I can make myself or have helped myself do. But I can't change people. I can't change the cruelty. I can't change the unhappiness that people have. And that's really, really a sad thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Richard, please unmute.
Yes, I took a couple of things away from Curt's talk. I think were very valuable things I had halfway determined before. First, the most important thing, life is a balance. There are often many different acceptable solutions, some better than others, to a given problem. I read what everyone said about the donut anecdote, and I thought that a lot of good comments, but that also means there were different solutions that would work. And this thing about, is there a perfectly logical way to solve problems? I used to think that when I was young. I no longer do. I think there is a balance, as he mentioned in his talk. It has to be a solution of logic, which will, yes, only take you so far, and then knowing the other person as much as you can, or the other people as much as you can, and the emotional part. So thank you very much, Curt.
Thank you, Richard. Back to you, Jim. No other raised hands here.
There are no other raised hands. Okay. Curt, did you ever get your donut?
I did, which is why I'm so big today. Yes, Diane.
This just came to me, but that's the way a lot of stuff happens for me. But I'm struck by the relationship of your talk to a movie that's available these days on Netflix called Worth with Michael Keaton. He plays, the name escapes me, the man who was the master determining awards for 9/11 to all the family members of people who perished in the terrorist attack. Kenneth Feingold. It's probably based on a biographical novel, story that Feingold wrote. But it's the story of this man who is very expert in creating awards like this through a legal system, rational, long precedents for awarding on an economic value scale. And mostly, not exclusively, but a lot of women who worked as his law partner and on the crew of people who were trying to give the awards, who said, look, there has to be adjustments. You have to bring compassion into this process. It can't just be a formula. And it's quite nicely laid out how he evolved his thinking on this and came to be comfortable saying, all right, I'm the master. I got a lot of discretion available to me. I can work these gray areas the best way I can with a big dose of rationality, but still compassion too. And I think it illustrates that tension between needing some kind of framework. I would be terrified of us all acting on our passionate impulses. Please spare me. But not just getting lazy and saying, let the system do its thing. The first impulse should be human and compassionate, and then you sort of see how to make it fair and work for lots of people. And so enjoy looking at Worth if you want a sort of kind of extended lesson in that approach. Thank you.
One more, I think, over there.
Thank you, Diane.
One very interesting thing which came to mind after I heard Curt's story of his mom was that, and this will make all of you smile, that back in India, we think that America was always a affluent society. It was always replete with cars and champagne and whiskey and tuxedos, because those are the images we get back home. So anyone being dirt poor, anyone rising out of a poor family, it's it's like a stunning revelation back home. When I said Bill Clinton came from a poor family, people would not believe me. How can that be? There are no poor families in America. That's the impression we carry back home. But this story was very touching, and thank you for sharing that.
Hi, this is Dan. I just wanted to comment on Curt's, part of Curt's really nice talk about the question of whether there are examples in American society where aggression is rewarded. And there are scads of them, particularly among males. And I put in the chat when he said that football is the first one. But much more seriously, although I would argue that football is emblematic in many ways, but much more seriously, all of the hierarchical structures in which male bullying, and I use the word bullying advisedly, is not only rewarded, but celebrated, whether it's the executive who has the stockholders cheering when he, and it's usually he, fires thousands of employees, whether it's the drill sergeant who is praised for beating the living daylights out of people in order to get them to become unthinking war machines, whether it's the high school or elementary school bully whose classmates and sometimes whose teachers and often whose parents cheer him on for expressing that kind of dominance. These are all not only out there, but widely, if not universally praised in large segments of American culture. And it takes its form in racism too. Lynching is about as aggressive as you can get. And, you know, until not too many decades ago, there were a lot of people who were celebrating that. So it's deep, and I don't know how to purge it from American culture, but it's out there. A lot of our gun culture is based on the same psychology. And there have to be ways of struggling against it and to transform it. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan.
Hi. I was thinking, well, a lot of things, but I don't know. At some point when Curt was speaking, I was thinking about an incident of myself being in ShopRite, going to ShopRite, and I was thinking what happened during this incident, not an incident, but I was outside the door and I was looking for a cart, and there was a lady behind me, and I think she was incapacitated in some way. She was either had a cane, I don't remember. She was sort of handicapped in some way. And she was behind me looking for a cart, so I just pulled out the cart and I gave it to her. And she didn't expect it. It was like, wow, somebody is helping me? Or it seemed like she was surprised by just this small act of just, it seemed like, you know, a humane act. And I gave her the cart and she said, "Oh, thank you." And I said to her, "It didn't cost me anything." And she kind of didn't know what to say about that. But anyway, you know, I thought about it and, you know, it doesn't cost anything to do something like that on just a one-to-one level. Anyway.
Thank you, Kate. May there be more such moments.
I think you all hit the nail on the head in so many ways of trying to figure out the complexities of these, but it's also that it's not just based on rationality, which is what our ethics should be. And it has to do with those little random acts of kindness. And there have been multiple studies that show that those little things actually change the dynamics in situations over and over again. And we need to remember the power of relationships and the power of community to affect change. And if we start with just trying to connect as a human to another person, that makes all the difference in the world.
To learn more about us, visit our website, ethicalfocus.org, or email us at admin@ethicalfocus.org, and we'll get back to you. To make a donation, go to ethicalfocus.org/donate. Please follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and you can watch many of our past programs on our YouTube channel.